What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you an updated meta analysis for the June 2018 format. We're just 1 week away from the North American and South American WCQs. The European WCQ is going to follow the week after, and we just had one of the largest nationals take place with some surprising results in the UK. So that's what I wanted to discuss, give you guys an overall breakdown so you guys can be prepared going into these large events. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons, as always. So big shout outs today to Elijah as well as Jonas. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So here is the top 32 breakdown from the 700 plus UK National. Now I went with the top 32 breakdown even though it cut to top 64, because when you get to the top 32 you start cutting out a lot of the other decks that managed to wiggle their way in that top cut. And I'll still go ahead and post a quick image of that top 64 just so you guys can see what other decks made it in there. I think there was like a couple spiral decks that made it, some other extraneous decks, but I wanted to kind of get to the core central just bulk of the top 32 because I feel like that's a lot more important, especially as these top cuts start to dwindle down. The higher representation and I guess the proportions really do start to matter. So one of the things you see when you look at this pie chart is the fact that, you know, surprise, surprise, Trickstar Sky Striker is still the most represented deck in top cut. It was also the most represented deck going into the tournament from the start, I believe, and so really it should be no surprise. We've already established that this deck is the strongest deck, but you would think that the deck that takes up 66% representation of the top 32 is going to be the deck to win the whole event, right? Well, you would be 100% wrong, because to everyone's surprise, Burning Abyss managed to win the UK Nationals. Can you guys believe that? I actually had to take a double take and question what year it actually was, because it seems that Burning Abyss has just managed to transcend any and all logic when it comes to being able to just remain competitively relevant. It's managed to do this before. It's not like this is just some random one-off anomaly. It's been able to just take events in just the most crazy and random of formats, and that's what I kind of wanted to go into. So how did Burning Abyss, the one lone Burning Abyss player, Thomas Rose, manage to basically just take the entire event? Well, there's a lot of good things that Burning Abyss has going for it in this particular meta, and that's what we're going to dive into. First off, Burning Abyss has a very strong advantage because it's not really susceptible to a lot of hand traps. The two most popular hand traps at the current moment are Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring and Droll and Lockbird. Well, Droll and Lockbird doesn't really do anything to this deck because Burning Abyss is a deck that doesn't really do a whole lot of searching. Sure, you get your Scarm Search, and this particular variant was playing Sekka's Light, so there are some ways for the deck to draw cards, but compared to some of these other decks, like, you know, say Trickstar Sky Striker, where half of the deck basically has cards that include the text, add this card from deck to hand, that's going to make a substantial difference, and you're basically making 3 cards out of your opponent's 40 effectively useless against your entire strategy. Ash Blossom also is not exactly too far behind in comparison to Droll and Lockbird. Now, obviously you can Ash Blossom something like the Sekka's Light or even a Tour Guide, and that can hurt quite a bit, but the thing is, outside of those specific plays, Ash Blossom isn't really going to do a whole lot against Burning Abyss in general. It's just going to have slightly more utility than, say, something like Droll and Lockbird, and I think that makes sense. I mean, Ash Blossom is universally just one of the most generically best hand traps, so I think it kind of is a bit justified, but when you look at that, I think that's one advantage that you have playing a deck like this. Now, what are the other advantages? Well, Trickstar Sky Striker has been defined as the strongest deck, or at least the most represented deck of the current format, and one of the biggest inherent weaknesses of Trickstars, pretty much it's always had this weakness, is trying to get over large monsters, whether they're in attack or defense mode. And Dante happens to have a defense of 2500, Beatrice has a defense of 28, and it's very difficult for the Trickstar Sky Striker deck to kind of overcome these large defensive bodies, even with the Sky Striker component added into the deck. Sure, you've got cards like Afterburner, but the thing is, when it comes to Burning Abyss, they're just gonna basically get so much advantage off of you hitting something with Afterburner that you're going to be taking a minus, and Burning Abyss is going to outgrind you, which is what it does best. So your options are actually rather limited in that aspect. Another piece that attributed to the success of this strategy was the incorporation iteration of Rescue Cat. Now, Rescue Cat essentially just makes a 1-card Naturia Beast in tandem with Gallus the Star Beast, as well as Elephun. So, essentially, you can still special summon your Burning Abyss monsters, establish your board, and then if you haven't used your normal summon, you could summon a Rescue Cat, bring out your 2 monsters, and on a Naturia Beast in addition to everything else you were able to summon that turn. Seems pretty good, especially since Trickstar Sky Striker actually has 0 outs to a Naturia Beast for the most part. I mean, most times, depending on the variant of the deck that you're playing, a Naturia Beast is just going to spell game over, and you're just going to scoop it up and move to the next game, because it's going to be very awkward for you to try to make like a Link 3, or a monster that's going to be able to kill the Naturia Beast without having to use spell cards, since that's such a crucial component of your deck. So I think the Rescue Cat inclusion was actually a very good meta call, and it's also good because Gallus also happens to be a level 3, so worst case scenario, if you don't want to go for the Naturia Beast play, you can just summon out 2 Gallus, make a Dante, so it doesn't even take away from your engine itself, and it's like you're playing 3 more copies of Tour Guide, except it just doesn't have to be searchable through Scarm. So that, I mean, pretty much when you wrap it all up, I think this was a very good meta call. Now, obviously having BLS at 3 helps the deck out tremendously, considering, you know, Dante also happens to be a light, so your engine kind of has built-in targets that you can banish for BLS, and again, big monsters are very problematic for Trickstar Sky Striker, and no deck is playing, you know, any card that really stops in battle effects. And Scapegoat doesn't really matter if you're going to hit your opponent for so much damage that they're going to die before the Scapegoat even becomes relevant. So there's a lot of really good things this deck has going for it. I think the big question on everyone's mind is this a deck that really actually has a chance at the North and South American WCQ? I think now that people know about it, people are going to be much more cognizant, especially when it comes to their deck building, to be prepared for a deck like this. Now, that's the biggest thing. Thomas Rose had the surprise factor going for him a lot, and there are some decks that have built-in outs like Abyss Dweller, so they're going to have a natural advantage against a Burning Abyss matchup. But with Trickstar Sky Striker still being the strongest deck, and I don't really see that changing for the foreseeable future, I think this is a pretty decent meta call, but you're really working against the fact that people are going to know what you're doing. They're going to know to like Ash your Rescue Cat, or they're going to know to just do specific things to kind of stop and hedge their chances from just automatically losing on turn 1. But it doesn't mean it's not impossible for Burning Abyss to still thrive in this current competitive format. Now, the next deck I want to talk about was Pendulum Magician, because that actually managed to take 2nd place at this event. So again, Sky Striker Trickstar made it as far as top 4, but Pendulum Magician happened to be going against Burning Abyss in the final. Now, I explained in my top 5 budget decks of this format that Pendulum Magician actually has probably one of the best matchups going up against Sky Striker Trickstar. It's a deck that is very consistent. It goes and pretty much produces really big monsters that, again, are very problematic for the deck. And not only are these monsters big, but they have built-in effect negation or even spell and trap negation that makes it very difficult for Trickstar Sky Striker to play. I mean, look at a card like Vortex Dragon. Look at Jackal King. These cards are big and they have effect negation, and that makes it so that the Trickstar Sky Striker player can't run them over before they go on with their plays, and that way it's just going to pretty much bring the deck to its knees, and I think that's what we're starting to see here. This deck also managed to take 1st place at the ARG in Atlantic City. I know some of you guys don't really consider ARGs like premier tops or anything, but I thought it was definitely worth noting, especially since we're this close to the NAWCQ. Sky Striker Trickstar still has the highest representation, and I still think in terms of overall representation, it probably is the strongest deck moving into this format. But I think now that it's been established, people are starting to find these other strategies that actually are very effective against these decks, even though they might have, you know, worse matchups depending on what they might go against. I also don't want to forget about Goki. Goki still managed to make it into the top 4 of the UK Nationals as well. And what was interesting is that at the ARG, 5 of the top 16 were Trickstar Sky Striker, and 5 more were Goki. So you're seeing a lot higher Goki representation here in the States. I know these events really can't be compared to one another because they're not really on the same level, but one thing that a lot of people do have to consider for, especially the NAWCQ, NAWCQ is that Goki, I believe, is going to be much more popular than we've been seeing in all of these other nationals, just mainly due in part to Link Karibo. I'm not taking anything away from the deck without it, but I think a lot more people here in the States especially like Goki. They've been playing Goki for a long time, and they've been proving the success that Goki can really have, especially since people aren't really playing a ton of hand traps, and Called by the Grave is a very nasty card in specific circumstances. Realistically, if Goki is going to extra link you, you probably just lost that game. So it's one of those things where Goki can just assemble some free wins, and depending on how well you do, Goki could just be the absolute underdog in this circumstance and could realistically take the WCQ. I would not count that out. Aside from that, though, there were a plethora of other decks that managed to make the top 32 of the UK Nationals. I mean, you had stuff like Altergeist, you had Draco, there was even a Mermail in the top 32. I believe he lost to the Birding Abyss player in the top 32 feature match, but I think it's just really cool to see that you've got these other fringe decks like Altergeist and stuff still hanging in there, but it's also something to be mindful of that even though Altergeist and these other strategies may be falling by the wayside a little bit, at least in terms of top cut representation, that doesn't mean in your Swiss rounds leading up to the top cut, you're not going to see a couple Altergeist or a couple of True Dracos, a couple of Pendulum players. It's still going to be very realistically possible, but you should definitely still be planning for the Trickstar Sky Striker matchup, because you're probably going to be playing anywhere from like 5 to 10 of those decks in your Swiss rounds. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this overall meta analysis and how you think the NAWCQ and the South American WCQ are going to play out. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video helpful, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.